All right. I hope you can hear me out there. I hope that's what we're getting. Good to be with you tonight. Had a few technical difficulties and so forth, and so I have to kind of apologize for that at the outset. That's why we're getting such a late start. But it's good to be with you. Thanks for joining with me tonight on another round of WOW Live, Word on Wednesdays Live. Things are a little backwards here, so if you see me glancing away, it's because I had to rearrange things a little bit here to keep my script online and everything. In our tonight we're going to continue our. I'm rattled a little bit. Let me just take a deep breath. Okay, I think we're ready. I think we're okay now. We're going to continue tonight our examination of dinosaurs and the Bible. I hope that you enjoy this subject at least half as much as what I do. It's long been a favorite of mine, been a big fan of dinosaurs since I was a kid, but always struggled with how dinosaurs relate to the Bible. And so it was just great along my path as I traveled, asking questions, looking for answers, to find some good answers to that whole question and to understand a little bit better what's going on in our own culture, which I'm convinced is where the confusion and the confounding of the whole subject comes into play. So let's get started without any further ado. You might remember last week I related the story about the time that I was teaching some younger elementary age children about dinosaurs and the Bible. I began by asking them, well, when did dinosaurs live? And they responded almost as if they had rehearsed the answer long ago. Long ago. They even had that kind of cadence about it that little kids can have, and all of them together in unison, long ago. And in a way, they really had rehearsed that answer. I mean, that's what they had learned about dinosaurs in school, in their homes, on TV programs, at the movies, from books, and so on. Dinosaurs lived long ago. That's the message that we have to teach people when they're kids, right? I mean, whatever else we do, we have to get the kids to believe that. That's important for science and so forth. It's how the established order propagates their agenda. You have to convince kids. And that's why they use dinosaurs. Dinosaurs serve as a very ready vehicle to teach this long ages concept to the kids. Why? Because, like I said, as a kid, I loved dinosaurs. All kids love dinosaurs. They're fascinated by monsters, and dinosaurs count as big monsters. Our 3-year-old grandson has been running around growling like a dinosaur for the last year and a half, and he likes dinosaurs. Why? He's a kid, and kids like dinosaurs. So that's what they use, the dinosaur angle, to get kids to believe in long ages. I decided to Google the phrase, dinosaurs lived long ago, and I found out that there is a song out there with that title. Actually, there are at least 2 songs with that title out there that I found, songs for children. And one of the songs is set to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Dinosaurs lived long ago, how many types do you know? Pterodactyls in the sky, see them flying way up high. Sing with me. Dinosaurs lived long ago, how many types do you know? Dinosaurs lived long ago, how many types do you know? T-Rex was a dinosaur with a loud and fearsome roar. I had to wonder about that one when I heard it, because has anybody actually ever heard a Tyrannosaurus? Maybe they just sort of squeak when they open that big mouth. I mean, we don't know. Dinosaurs lived long ago, how many types do you know? And there are even more verses, of course, but I believe I've made you suffer enough through that. Then I decided to take a look at children's books about dinosaurs. Here's a book for 4 to 8-year-olds, about the same age of kids that I was teaching in that Awana class several years ago. And it's called The Dinosaur Encyclopedia for Kids. It's written by Dinosaur George Blazing and Corey Woodruff. Dinosaur George. I wonder if he's like, George of the Jungle or something. Or maybe, George of the Jurassic George, right? In any case, George is getting the message out there. On the second page of text, I read this, the very first sentence on the page. Dinosaurs are a group of reptiles that first lived about 245 million years ago. Now, none of us has a frame of reference that allows us to appreciate how big a number 245 million actually is. Right? I mean, that's just a huge number. Congress has even less of an idea. Okay, they throw numbers that big around like cotton candy, and the money disappears faster than cotton candy on a hot skillet. It's just gone. That's the way they deal with it. And it's especially true for little kids that numbers in the millions are simply beyond their comprehension. I mean, I can't comprehend a million of anything. Okay, 245 million is a really big number. And the whole reason for putting it in the kids' book is simply this: to get across the idea, dinosaurs lived long ago. By Jurassic George, sure, right? Here's another children's encyclopedia about dinosaurs, my encyclopedia of very important dinosaurs. The first page says this: if you could use a time machine to visit the age of the dinosaurs, you might think that you had arrived on an alien planet. The Earth has changed so much since dinosaurs were alive that it almost seems like a completely different world. And the next page says, for 181 million years, dinosaurs were the most dominant land animals on Earth. It wasn't even about 180 million. It's 181 million. They know that exactly, right? So dinosaurs were king for 181 million years. Remember, the key thing here is we have to get that millions of years idea into kids' heads. It wouldn't be fair to tell them things like, we believe they lived millions of years ago. We believe they were king of the earth for 181 million years. You couldn't even say, we're pretty sure that dinosaurs and humans didn't live at the same time. I mean, the kids have to believe that the experts know all these things for certain about dinosaurs. Right? That's the ticket. That's what you have to get them across. Someone once said this: if you say something loudly enough and long enough, eventually people will believe it. Now that's been attributed to Adolf Hitler. He might well have said it. I don't know if he actually did or not, but he sure practiced the concept. And I think the academic establishment in our time is practicing the exact same thing. And as we're going to see in a moment, they're not really as certain at all about their ideas as they sometimes let on. They're really protective about things. Now, in past lessons, we have talked about the issues with radiometric dating of the rock layers. That radiometric dating, as we said, is filled with prior assumptions, things that must be assented to before anyone picks up a rock sample. You got to believe these certain things before going into it. They don't use these dating methods to prove that the Earth is old. All right, that's not what the whole thing about the dating is. Okay, they just want to find out how old any particular rock sample is because they already believe that the Earth is old. They've already made that assumption. So they enter the rock dating process with that kind of assumption and other assumptions that they make. I know a little bit about dating rocks. I dated Debbie Rock for a while, and then I married her. So I know about dating rocks. She's Debbie Black now, but she was Debbie Rock. So anyway, so I know what I'm talking about here. We compared dating of things that were here before we were here with the example of figuring out how long a candle had been burning before we came into the room where it was. There's not enough data available for anyone to be certain about anything, especially if we allow that the candle, just like the history of our planet, has been unique to the situation, with no other context available to us with which we might be able to compare our burning candle. No other candles that we can burn, no other comparisons we can make to other conditions and use those as means of explaining what's happening in this room or what has happened in this room, because there certainly is no context with which we might compare the history of Earth. I mean, this is it, folks. This is all we have. We're not living on another planet, or we don't have access to another planet where life might be or not be or whatever. We don't have any of that information. This is all we have. This is all that we see. And you can't measure what you can't see. And they can't see the past. We don't know what was happening in the room before we came in there with the candle burning. We don't know what was happening before we got around. Okay? We've also put forward the idea that the rock layers, like those found in the Grand Canyon here, those rock layers were laid down in a short amount of time as a result of the incredible hydrologic forces caused by the Great Flood. High energy activity beyond our imagination taking place during this event. It didn't, and it couldn't, have taken millions of years for those rock layers to form, okay? Because the layers are different, they obviously were laid down during separate periods of time, but the overall length of time for all of them to be formed could not be extremely vast. And let me tell you why, and I've told you before, but let me just review it for you. If layer A, okay, was laid down, and then layer B was laid down upon it 1 million years later, well then the very surface area of layer A before B came along was exposed to 1 million years of atmospheric activity, 1 million years of wind, 1 million years of water, 1 million years of burning direct sunlight and dry conditions, wet conditions, warm conditions, hot conditions, cold conditions. And that surface ought to therefore show signs of all this activity, all this erosion that would have happened over 1 million years, all the signs of meteor impacts that would have happened over 1 million years. Meteorites should be in the rock layers, okay? Signs of creek beds, river beds, carved out ditches, gullies, runoffs, alluvial plains, but none of the rock layers show any evidence at all of these kinds of activities. The layers look like a stack of pancakes that one was set right on top of another. They mesh perfectly. However, these data points, these facts, don't mean anything to the overseers of that dominant viewpoint. They ignore the facts because, if examined too closely, the facts are going to reveal the prevailing narrative. If you don't believe me, that there is an agenda and that there is an effort to silence any and all dissent from that prevailing narrative that underlies that agenda, well then listen to this story about a man named Dr. Andrew Snelling. Dr. Snelling holds a PhD in geology from the University of Sydney and has worked as a consultant research geologist in both Australia and the United States. He's the author of numerous scientific articles, and Dr. Snelling is also a young Earth creationist. Now, there is a layer of rock in the Grand Canyon called the Tapeats Sandstone. And there are portions of the Tapeats Sandstone that are bent and they're folded. As you can kind of see here, it has that sort of wavy appearance. This isn't straight rock, this is scrunched up rock, bent and folded. Evolutionists believe the Tapeats sandstone layer was laid down about 500 million years ago. And over the last 450 million years, about 10,000 feet of layers were laid down upon the sandstone, causing it to compress and harden. Now, hard rock cannot bend, okay? Hard rock cannot fold up like a dish towel. With enough pressure on it, it would move, but it would simply break. It would just snap like a vanilla wafer cookie, and crumble. I mean, that's the way the cookie crumbles. It's also the way the rocks crumble. Pressure puts on them, and they break. They don't bend. So how do the evolutionists explain this bending? Well, they argue that the hardened sandstone fell under intense heat and pressure from this deep burial that it experienced, okay? So it made the sandstone soft like Play-Doh and able to be folded and molded. But here's the thing, see? Hard rock that is subjected to such extreme heat and pressure should have metamorphosized, okay? It should have changed. The original sedimentary layers there should have changed into something else, changing the minerals, changing the shape of crystals within that sandstone, changing the rock textures. As coal becomes a diamond under great extreme heat and pressure. The same thing would have happened here. There would have been changes, or similar things anyway. It would have changed the rock. It wouldn't be sandstone anymore. It would be something else. And an expert analysis of the composition, then, of these bent layers, and comparing those bent layers to other sections of the Tapeats sandstone that aren't folded or bent, well, that should either prove or disprove what the evolutionist geologists are saying. If what they're saying is so, there should be a difference between the folded area and the level or straight area. I mean, if they're right, the sandstone in the bent region should be notably different from the rock in the unbent regions. And the assumption is that the sandstone was hardened before this bending and folding happened. So the creationist Dr. Snelling wanted to do this. He wanted to collect rock samples from both regions and then conduct the proper tests to compare rocks from the folded area to the rocks from the unfolded area. Now that just makes good scientific sense. And Dr. Snelling said this: for the answer, we would have to examine the Tapeats sandstone under a geological microscope to see what minerals it contains and examine the cement binding the grains to determine if any metamorphic changes have occurred. So you need the microscope to see if there's been any metamorphosis at the tiny level, right? And you need a microscope to see it. And you can't bring the microscope on site. So you have to take rocks away from the site and back to the lab, right? About 20 years ago, though, Dr. Snelling took a look through the geological literature that was on this subject, but on this area of work, and was surprised to learn no one had ever done this test. No one had ever thought with the heat idea, the pressure idea, about metamorphosis, which that's pretty basic. Any basic book on geology or rocks and minerals will tell you something about metamorphic rocks. All right. So anybody should have, somebody should have thought about this along the way. We ought to test the folds and test the straight areas and see if our theory holds up, our idea about heat and pressure. So he couldn't find anything. Nobody did anything. In fact, there was never a time where Tapeats sandstone was put under a geologic microscope that he could find for any reason whatsoever. So he decided that he would go and do the work. All right? And he said, I couldn't just walk into Grand Canyon and start chipping away at the rocks. So, on November 25th, 2013, might be good to keep that number in your mind there, 2013, he said, I lodged a research proposal with a research and sampling permit application with Grand Canyon National Park, or GCNP, to collect 50 to 60 fist-size samples in 4 folds and of the same rock layers from locations far away from those folds for comparison. So it's the same layer of rock, it's just further away, and it's not folded farther away. So that's kind of what he's saying there. So on February 9th, 2014, at the request of the GCNP staff, I submitted 3 peer reviews supporting the research proposal. So what he's saying there is he basically got references. 3 other geologists looked at the work he proposed to do and, gave their opinion of it and reviewed the work and, basically approved of it or whatever. Kind of like you get a reference for a job you were applying for. Nearly a month later, he said, I received a letter from the then chief of the Grand Canyon National Park Research Office stating that my application package had been reviewed by multiple reviewers who had concluded that my study would not be permitted. They provided no technical or scientific objections to my proposed research. So what gives here? What's going on? It seemed like a simple enough test. No one else had ever done it before. He's willing to go out and do the work. You'd think it'd be something that they would want to know. He's a trained geologist. He's got his PhD, etc., etc., etc. What's the problem? Now get this. A Christian legal group, the Alliance Defending Freedom, submitted on behalf of Dr. Snelling a Freedom of Information Act request to the National Park Service in Denver to secure copies of staff correspondence back at the Grand Canyon regarding Dr. Snelling's research proposal. What were they chatting about in-house? What were they emailing each other about regarding this and everything? And Dr. Snelling tells us in this article what the Alliance Defending Freedom found out. This request netted the comments by the 3 academic geologists who had reviewed my research application. All 3 had expressed scorn at my Christian faith and creationist worldview, insisting that my research not be permitted. Only one of the 3 provided some trivial technical oversights in my research proposal. Oh, so they didn't like the idea that he was a creationist, even to the point of being scornful in their correspondence with one another. And that's via written record, emails and memos and such. One wonders what manner of things they probably said to each other when they were on the phone about this subject. Probably best we don't know. It probably goes without saying, folks, that this kind of attitude is ridiculously unprofessional. Here's the thing. Science, for what it claims to be, ought to be humbly open to criticism. If the point is to get the story right, if they really are after the truth, well then any theories that are out there taking guesses and stabs at what might have happened ought to be subjected to scientifically rigorous scrutiny to be sure that it stands the test. I wonder what they were afraid of, you see. It sounds like they were trying to protect their viewpoint, trying to preserve their philosophical agenda, trying to keep the kids on track with that millions of years thing. You see, Dr. Snelling submitted his proposal once again. After revising the research proposal to deal with those technical details that the one guy brought up, I resubmitted the amended research proposal with another application for a research and sampling permit. This time, they insisted that for my application to be considered, I first had to submit details and photographs of all planned sample sites. Well, this means he's going to have to make an independent trip of the actual research, another trip at his own dime to go out and take pictures of all the sites he plans to do and do the work. He's going to have to get to those sites. That's going to involve traveling downriver. He's going to need a permit for that. You can just see how this is a definite effort to try to discourage him completely from even attempting this any longer. Now, the Alliance Defending Freedom lawyers hadn't yet finished their work. They requested copies of all research permits submitted in early 2016. So you sort of get the idea of the length of time this is taking. At the end of 2013, he put in for the whole thing. 2014, at the beginning of it, June, I think, he finds out he can't do it. And now it's 2016, or past that point. They want to know, they want to look at all the research permits submitted in early 2016. So they get that information, and not a single permit made any requirement of any researcher to take photos of the sites where they plan to do their research. I mean, that's a stupid request. Dr. Snelling was the only one being hassled. Here's how the story unfolded from there. Several months later, the Grand Canyon National Park superintendent finally replied, admitting my proposal was, quote, well stated, with methods that are similar or equal to standard scientific practice to test the hypothesis provided. Yet she repeated the demand for me to determine the sites where I planned to take rock samples, citing concerns for the environment that had never been raised with other research applications. So again, going completely, now we're trying the environmental thing. Well, you might mess with some snail darter or something. In May of 2017, and by the time I had already taught those kids about dinosaurs back in March of 2017, just kind of a forethought, they lived long ago, right? In May of 2017, ADF lawyers filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court in Phoenix on my behalf against the Grand Canyon National Park, the National Park Service, and the Department of the Interior for worldview discrimination. All the incriminating correspondence was appended to the lawsuit. News of the legal action appeared on the front pages of the Washington Times and in the New York Times. And it wasn't long before lawyers representing the Departments of Justice and the Interior responded to the lawsuit. After all, I was suing the federal government for worldview discrimination because this was contrary to my rights regarding the free exercise of religious beliefs as established in Amendment No. 1 to the U.S. Constitution. In ensuing discussions, the U.S. government lawyers readily admitted it was an open and shut case and quickly sought to settle it. On June the 7th, 2017, I reapplied for the research and sampling permit with GCNP, and on June 23, 2017, they issued my permit. On the same day, I also submitted a research river trip application, which they granted on June 26, 2017. 2 days later, on June 28th, the lawsuit was deemed settled and voluntarily dismissed. Man, all of this foolishness and getting the runaround and the red tape, all because that the scientist who wanted to collect about 50 or 60 so rock samples from an experiment happened to be a Christian and a Bible believer. Folks, don't ever buy into the idea that science operates without a bias. The scientific and academic institutions comprising the world of academia globally do indeed have a bias. And it didn't stop there either. Once the results of the legal action were announced in the papers, professional geologists everywhere were livid. He writes, that same day, a press release announcing the lawsuit victory instigated a media flurry. Articles appeared in newspapers across the country. Reports even made it to the front page of the Australia's only national newspaper, The Australian, complete with a photo of me in Grand Canyon. The lawsuit also showed up in the science media, the United States premier weekly journal Science, and in the newsletter of the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. In both instances, get this, scathing comments about my academic credentials were repeated by leading academics, including one whose opposition to my research proposal was appended to the lawsuit. So one of the guys who reviewed him and was on the butt end of that legal situation was complaining after the thing was decided. He goes on to say, why this long struggle? Why would these academics so vehemently oppose Grand Canyon National Park permitting me to collect a couple dozen small samples of rocks? The simple answer is that if these now hardened rock layers were bent into these folds while the sedimentary layers were still wet and soft soon after deposition, as expected in the biblical flood model, well then, the 500 plus million years of evolutionary time on which they base their worldview never happened. When people become this angry for fear that their beliefs are being challenged, the most logical conclusion to which one can come is that their belief system isn't nearly as secure as they lead us to believe. They had some serious insecurity problems with their ideas. This was their baby. This was their brainchild, and they had to protect it. It hasn't matured yet. We're going to tell everybody it's absolutely true because we got to sell this thing big time. But we're not so sure ourselves, and we got to protect this thing because we can't let any kind of criticism or dissent or anything come up. My goodness, we've all staked our careers and our very livelihood on all of this. That's their problem. Now, I know Dr. Snelling's experiences don't directly have anything to do with our subject, dinosaurs in the Bible, but I wanted you to be aware of the kinds of attitudes that creationists come up against when dealing with the scientific establishment that's out there. Also, I believe, and this is just one small sample, we could cite name after name, condition after condition, situation after situation. I was at an intelligent design conference back in 2006, and I met a guy by the name of Jonathan. His last name's going to escape me now. Terrible. Well, at any rate, he was an author and one of the speakers at the thing, and he had written some books that I had. And I brought my copy of one of his books with me to ask him to sign it. He says, "Are you sure you want to be seen with me? Just even being in my presence could cost you in your professional life. You're aware of that, right?" He says, "I'll sign this, but don't let anybody see that you've been with me. Don't show anybody the signature." And he was somewhat being humorous, sarcastic, and facetious all at the same time, because he had experienced all kinds of professional hassles for coming out and questioning the theory of evolution. He had a book, 12 Icons of Evolution, I think it was called. Boy, I can't remember that guy's last name. But anyhow, Jonathan Wells. Boom, thank you, Lord. Okay, so Jonathan Wells was the guy, and he had experienced all kinds of professional snubbing and everything else. And others have lost their jobs over situations like this. I just wanted you to have some idea of what this is like. And also, I believe this. I believe it's honest and justifiable for you to know that these critics, their confidence in their own worldview is pretty shaky. It's not as secure as they lead you to think. Again, what are these folks afraid of? I am reminded of the words of the Apostle Peter, 1 Peter 3, 3 through 6. He says, "Scoffers are going to come in the last days, walking according to their own desires, their own lusts, the things that they want out of life. And they're going to say, 'Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they willfully forget, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water.'" The critics of God's word willfully forget about God's sudden creation of everything, as well as willfully forgetting about the catastrophic impact of the great flood event in Noah's time. Unlike what they claim, things have not continued as they were from the very beginning. Global events can and do happen quickly and suddenly. And when Jesus suddenly appears, you guys are going to be in trouble because you've sought to live life according to your own lusts, your own desires. Folks, you can't exactly know what happened in the room with that candle before you showed up, and you have no way of knowing what's going to happen to the candle after you leave. And this same thinking applies directly then to the subject of dinosaurs. I want you to take a look at this photo here. A fossil graveyard. Now, I don't know where in the world this particular bunch of bones is located, but it illustrates the idea of what are called dinosaur graveyards that are found around the globe. Massive piles of bones all in one place in the rock layers in the ground. How did this happen? Everything's all apart. It's in pieces. I found this photo at a website called Genesis Park. It was part of an article about a very interesting story regarding dinosaur bones. They say in the article, perhaps the most challenging fossil phenomena for Darwinian apologists to explain are the vast graveyards of animal remains that are found throughout the world. Ongoing excavations in the Gobi Desert tell of one such site that has become an embarrassment to evolutionists. 25 theropod dinosaurs have been discovered, along with 200 skulls of mammals. There is no evidence of the several million-year evolutionary gap or of the iridium boundary that is thought to delineate when the dinosaurs became extinct. Now, I should explain to you at this point about iridium. Iridium is a very hard metallic element. And this iridium boundary they're talking about is a particular deposit in among the rock layers. It's a particular layer on its own, apparently, where, along with other rocks in that layer, a significant amount of this metal element, metallic element, iridium, is found. Now, this iridium is believed to be the result of a comet that impacted the Earth, according to them, some 65 million years ago, and thus killing all the dinosaurs. So that's the big comet event that wiped out the dinosaurs. What the Genesis Park folks are saying here is that this iridium boundary is not found with this fossil graveyard in the Gobi Desert. Yet that comet impact would be the prevailing explanation by the evolutionist for the dead dinosaurs that are found in that graveyard. So where is the iridium? The Genesis Park blog that I was reading goes on to quote from the journal Scientific American. The Gobi Desert of Central Asia is one of the Earth's desolate places, yet the Gobi is a paradise for paleontologists, people who study life that lived long ago. Our expeditions, jointly sponsored by the Mongolian Academy of Sciences and the American Museum of Natural History, have excavated dinosaurs, lizards, and small mammals in an unprecedented state of preservation. Freshly exposed skeletons sometimes look more like the recent remains of a carcass than like an 80-million-year-old fossil. Interesting. In yet another ironic twist, the rocks of the Gobi appear to be missing precisely those strata that currently hold the greatest public interest. No sections found thus far include the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary. That's the iridium boundary, okay? They don't contain it when the dinosaurs became extinct. Whatever cataclysm wiped out the dinosaurs and many other species then on the Earth, its mark on Central Asia seems to have been erased. Very interesting. These fossil graveyards or dinosaur bone beds are found in a number of locations around the world, not just the Gobi Desert. In the United States, there's bone deposits in lots of places. They're found in New Mexico, they're found in Wyoming, they're found in Montana, as well as other sites. In Alberta, Canada, there is a huge dinosaur bone bed that goes on for hundreds of miles. It holds too many dinosaur bones to be able to count. Another huge deposit is found in Nebraska, in Tanzania, in Belgium, in Mongolia. Huge catastrophic events trapped vast populations of animals, burying them all together. This is an interesting one, the Ashley Beds in South Carolina. It's roughly a 40-acre mixture of hogs and horses, mastodons, giant lizards. That's a quote from a guy back in the late 1800s, actually, giant lizards. And to my surprise, even human bones are found in this bone bed. Now, I thought giant lizards and humans didn't live together, but interesting. The picture I kind of get is herds of animals, dinosaurs or mastodons or horses or whatever, suddenly being overtaken by some obviously massive, catastrophic episode and being wiped out. A great big tsunami. The Great Flood, as we have been seeing and it described in our series, certainly provides an excellent explanation for all these bone beds all around the world, because the flood itself is global. Here's a familiar scene to anyone who spent some time on a beach. Seaweed, sticks, shells, and other debris, crabs and stuff like that, get washed up on shore due to the tide, right? You can see where the tide kind of came to right at the base of that dune, right? Kind of up the dune a little bit, and then it washed back. Okay. They get washed up on shore due to the tide. And I've learned this whole process even has a name. This what we're looking at is called a wrack zone, W-R-A-C-K. The debris gets as far as the energy of the waves can carry it, right? At least until it hits some kind of resistance, like in this case, that sand dune, which is often the case, that has built up from the water action of tides in the past. And so this sand is also carried, obviously, and it accumulates up there, and it doesn't wash away so much, and it builds a nice big hill. So I wonder then, what kind of wrack zones would extremely high energy waves, such as what you're seeing here, create? What kind of debris would they be carrying? How big would the quote-unquote sticks be? I have no trouble believing that something like this could very easily have carried the dinosaurs, the rocks, and everything. Could have created these dinosaur bone beds as well as other fossil graveyards all over the world. I imagine the dinosaurs going through that rumble and tumble would have been torn apart, the bones just scattered completely and separated. One website, in fact, for kids that I found, had this to say: thousands of dinosaur bones can be found where they were washed together by violent floodwaters and buried under mud, sand, and rock. Many of the animals were torn apart and their bones broken and jumbled. The mud and the sands often hardened like concrete to form the great layers of fossil rocks we find today. Very interesting. There's another very interesting phenomenon that shows up in rapidly buried dinosaur fossils, where there's a complete skeleton. The skeleton is found in what is called the death pose. That's what you see here, the death pose. The animal died quickly, and in its death, it struck a pose with an arched neck, back, and tail, mouth open. Again, thanks to Genesis Park, I found some great pictures of this death pose from various specimens found like this, not just this guy. There's numbers of them. As I read a portion of their article, what I'm going to do is take you through a slideshow of these dinosaur skeletons. When a complete skeleton is found intact, it provides much more information to the paleontologist than a loose pile of bones. One of the striking characteristics of many of these connected skeletons is that they exhibit a peculiar, contorted position popularly called the death pose. This pose of many fossilized dinosaurs with wide open mouth, head thrown back, and recurved tail likely resulted from the agonized death throes typical of brain damage from asphyxiation, according to paleontologists. And then they quote another article: an extremely dorsally extended posture of the spine, opisthotonus, characterized by the skull and neck recurved over the back and with strong extension of the tail, is observed in many well-preserved articulated amniote skeletons, birds, and other dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and at least placental mammals. Post-mortem water transport may show how these can be distinguished from causes of the opisthotic posture, which is a biotic syndrome. Okay? Very interesting. Others emphasize how a watery grave worked with the dinosaur physiology to create this unique posture. So then they have another quote from another article. A strong ligamentum elasticum was essential for all long-necked dinosaurs with a long tail. So they had to have good elasticity in their ligaments to have such long necks and long tails. That's basically what they just said there. The preloaded ligament helped them by saving energy in their terrestrial mode of life. It had lots of works on there to do the work for them, lots of pulleys and everything else, so to speak. Following their death, at which they were immersed in water, the stored energy along the vertebra was strong enough to arch back the spine, increasingly so as more and more muscles and other soft parts were decaying. And it is a special highlight that in the Compsognathus specimen, these gradual steps of recurvature can be substantiated too. Therefore, biomechanics is ruling the post-mortem weird posture of a carcass in a watery grave, not death throes. Okay, so basically what they're saying with that is it's not like the other group said there was death throes that caused these, not Jethro, but throes of death. They died and caused it. That's not what happened, that in their agony of death they arched like this, but rather that it was just something to do with their elasticity wearing out or giving out. Okay. The evidence continues to mount, however, no matter how you look at this, that dinosaurs died by drowning. If so, the global flood of Noah's Day once again provides the perfect explanation for dinosaurs drowning in the same event all over the world, and their bones being buried there. If dinosaurs died in Noah's flood, that means that dinosaurs and people lived at the same time. It means that dinosaurs did not live long ago, like our modern culture has been teaching kids for decades. Living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark. All flesh, okay? Including dinosaurs that would have been alive at the time. To keep them alive with you, they shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing on the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. And you shall take care of you shall take for yourself, of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. You know, it intrigued me when I learned that human bones, and I didn't know this before preparing for this particular lesson, discovering this idea about these Ashley beds, that human bones and the bones of giant lizards or dinosaurs were found together in the Ashley beds in South Carolina. I mean, if that's true, well, then it certainly shows that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. I'd never heard of this account until preparing for the lesson this week, but I'm not surprised that I didn't hear about it. If the prevailing narrative of evolution must be protected at all costs, as we learned from Dr. Andrew Snelling's difficulty, just to take a few rock samples from the Grand Canyon, well then, it's certainly not hard to imagine that the scientific establishment in general would ignore the evidence at Ashley Beds. Genesis Park gives this further description on their website about Ashley Beds. Let me get back to it here. The Ashley Beds is an enormous phosphate graveyard that contains mixed remains of man with land and sea animals, notably dinosaurs, plesiosaurs, whales, sharks, rhinos, horses, mastodons, mammoths, porpoises, elephants, deer, pigs, dogs, and sheep. This catalog of fossils from the phosphate beds was given in the records of Major Edward Willis, who displayed them at multiple expositions. Okay, so here's what I'm planning to cover next Wednesday night. We're going to continue with this topic of dinosaurs in the Bible. It's just there's other things that you need to hear about. God created land-dwelling dinosaurs on the very same day that he created human beings, day 6. Last week in this, we've seen evidence supporting this idea. Legends of dragons, artwork, and other artifacts containing images of dinosaurs and so forth. Next week, we're going to be examining this. Now, what you're looking at here are 2 fossilized trackways found in the riverbed of the Paluxy River in Texas. These particular trackways are called the Taylor Trail because a guy named Taylor, Taylor, discovered them initially and examined them. Now, the set of the larger tracks heading off to the right of your picture there were made by a dinosaur. And that other set of tracks, look for all the world to be human. Now, some creationists will say that the Paluxy tracks, and there's other ones besides just these that you see here, that Paluxy tracks ought not to be used by creation as evidence for the biblical account that dinosaurs and men would have lived together. Maybe they're right about that. I don't know. But I still think that these tracks are worth looking at. I do know that in the past, the Paluxy evidence sure rattled the cages of some in the evolutionary camp. They got pretty upset. So please plan on joining me next week for a look at these Paluxy tracks. It has been a pleasure to be with you this evening. I thank you for tuning in on this. I hope, like I say, that you find this interesting. If you do, let me know. If you have questions, please let me know. We can answer them on here as I prepare these lessons from week to week. It'd be my pleasure to be able to try to answer them for you. And if I can't find the answers, I'll make something up. So, no, I'm kidding. No, we will look to see what we can do. If we don't know, we don't know. But we'll look into it and see what we can find out. But I enjoy doing this. So until next time, I'll see you here, or I'll see you there, or I'll see you in the air, hopefully. God bless and take care.